Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into our post show, listening to Dave and Steve talk. I know they can get boring sometimes, so I'm glad that you're here to listen to me today. No, I'm just teasing.
Ouch.
I'm just teasing.
We're starting off on an antagonistic foot.
I'm just teasing.
Okay.
I'm just teasing. It's the cold weather, It's just
The cold weather,
the
yeah.
cold
This is
weather.
as cold
Yeah.
as it gets in Michigan, Josh.
for sure.
No, I'm seriously just kidding. I'm so glad that you guys are tuning into our post show today. My name is Josh. I'm the youth pastor here. This is Dave. He's
Hey,
the one
everybody.
that has been delivering these amazing messages throughout this entire deconstruction series. This is Elizabeth. Elizabeth does all the things in our church. There's just
Oh my
an
gosh.
endless list.
Everything.
And then this is Layla. Layla also does like all the things in
Yeah,
our church.
Layla.
So they are huge helps, and I am so glad that you guys are here on the post show. Lexi, if you're watching, we miss you. We can't wait to see you again whenever you get back from your vacation. So, but Elizabeth, thank you as always for filling in.
Oh,
You were a
of
great
course.
fill-in. So,
You're like the ultimate utility player.
Yeah?
No, it's just like there's no role you can't take over whenever there's need. It is amazing.
gosh.
And how well you do with them all.
so what I'm hearing is we were making jokes earlier about Layla speaking next week. It's going to be Elizabeth that speaks.
I think that would be amazing, don't you?
I don't.
Elizabeth's like, no, do not do that to me. Alrighty. Well, let's go ahead. Let's hop directly into our first question because we're starting just a little bit late, so we're just going to dive right into it. How's
Yeah.
that sound? All right. What thoughts, questions, or takeaways do you have from today's message?
I'm always still digesting,
Yeah.
but it's hard to wrap my head around some of the verses that you picked. Like you said earlier, like
Yeah.
some of them are like, ouch.
Yeah.
It does kind of like, especially that last one with the babies. Right? Like it sounds terrible.
It sounds horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I, as usual, love how you change the perspectives. I mean, you don't change them. You point out the differences
Yeah.
in the perspective about the context, the history, the prophecy, the reality. Because it makes so much more sense when there's context behind it. But I mean, it didn't change the fact that some of these things really happened, right? But
Oh, absolutely.
there's more
Yep.
to the story than just the verse. So I think that was like a big takeaway for me.
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't realize how many different stories or verses there are that look so glaring, right?
Yeah.
I've learned a lot of that throughout this whole
Right.
deconstruction series. But it's great to be able to have you, Dave,
Yeah.
break it down into, what's really going on. Because otherwise I'd be like, oh my gosh, why am I a Christian? Like, this
Yeah.
is terrible.
No,
you know?
seriously. You nailed it. The examples that I chose to use today, I chose because they are the most frequently cited passages from people who have deconstructed on why Christianity is not worth embracing. And these things sound horrible, especially the Psalm 139 with the babies.
Yeah.
They sound horrible because they are horrible.
Yeah.
They're horrible. But like with that passage, God wasn't telling anybody to do any of this.
Right.
He was saying, this is what's going to happen, and then this is what did happen. And just understanding that, you realize that the accusation has no substance once you realize what's actually happening there. Yeah.
Yeah, I really like the fact, I mean, I've said this in every single one that we've done, just how important getting the full context and understanding of what we're reading is, because it is so easy to open up your Bible, especially in the Old Testament, and Leviticus,
Yes.
and Deuteronomy, and the tail end of Exodus, and all this kind of stuff. I go, what in the world?
Right.
Why would God ever say this? Or why would, as it seems, God condone the Israelites going and attacking all these places within the promised land? But it really just stems from the judgment that God is placing on
That's
those
right.
people for their sins that they have had. And I really liked whenever you were talking about the Canaanites, in specifically those verses in Deuteronomy, but you're like, yeah, like I know this is where we see it in Deuteronomy, but we have to go all the way back to Abraham to see this full story that God is playing out. He's trying to extend that grace, just like he gives to each and every one of us every single day, to these people and work on their hearts and pull them to him. And he gave them 400 years before he's like, all right, well, now the judgment is going to come down.
Exactly right. It understood in context in the historical timeline. It's a demonstration on how merciful and patient God is. That He's not willing that any should perish, but wants everybody to come to repentance. That's the heart of God, and it even shows up in that story when you understand it all.
Yeah, for sure. Do you have anything, Elizabeth?
Mine was just like the same type of a thing, to where even like when like I were to read the Bible, sometimes I'm like, what? Like, what does that? What does that
seriously.
mean? And so it's just been so cool to like hear
Yeah.
what it actually means and how it shows how good God is, rather
Right.
than how messed up
Exactly.
it is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so critical that we read stories in the Bible through an accurate lens of who God is.
Yep.
It's like either this applies to so many things. Either you interpret God through your circumstances, or you interpret your circumstances through God.
Yep.
And when we begin to interpret circumstances through God, everything looks differently, and suddenly there emerges hope in the midst of the worst of circumstances.
Yeah. I think we should quote that. That was
I
really
know
good.
that
Yeah.
was. I literally was
there's
just like,
there's a
whoa.
little post show clip for Instagram this week right there.
Yeah.
No, I remember whenever I was in middle school and high school, always thinking that the God of the Old Testament was different from the God of the New Testament.
Oh, that's so common.
And then I remember like really talking to my youth pastor at the time and really diving into it and realizing like, no, like it's still the exact same God. It's just when like we are interpreting what the Old Testament is saying in not the accurate way, which makes us perceive God's character as something that it is not.
Exactly right, John. In fact, one of the things I left out this morning, it was one of the last at the cutting room floor, was that very notion that some people say, let's just get rid of the Old Testament,
Yep.
which, by the way, goes all the way back to Marcion. We talked about him in the Can You Trust the Bible series. And that as the Old Testament God is hateful, let's rule him and the Old Testament out and just stick with Jesus. However, Jesus shows up and goes, I and the Father are one.
Yep.
He says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father.
Yeah.
And I think the way we should look at it is, if you want to interpret the God of the Old Testament properly, look at Jesus.
Yeah.
That's how you interpret God properly.
And on top of that, Jesus also quoted the Old Testament, so we
lot.
can't throw out the Old Testament if we're really just following Jesus. Jesus uses it,
Yep.
so we have to use it and apply it to our lives too. Awesome. I love getting to hear your guys' thoughts and takeaways, and also get to talk about mine too. So I could do this all day, but we don't have time to do this all day.
We don't?
Because you got to go up there in just a few minutes and go preach this again.
I do need to do that
Yeah,
eventually.
You do need to do that eventually. All right. So, Dave, I'm going to actually just read all these points. I didn't put them on a slide. You started and opened up your message with giving these 5 points.
Yeah.
So the first one was we all crave peace. The second was peace rests on justice. The third was injustice destroys peace. The fourth was judgment restores justice. And the fifth was restore justice brings peace. Point 4 says that judgment restores justice. What is our role in judging, and what is our role in bringing justice? Because I feel like we as people can go, oh, Pastor Dave just went up there and said, oh, judgment, and it sounded like he said that judgment was good, and he told a story about how he used to have to discipline his kids, because obviously that's what the Bible tells us to do. But does that mean that I can judge people? What is our role in this?
I like this question. Do tell
I was
me.
going to say, Elizabeth and Layla, what do you think?
I've got no answer. I mean, this has probably been one of the harder topics for me to wrap my head around. Not that I don't believe what you said. I'm having a hard time, like, again, wrapping my head around it and justifying all of this. So, yes, I am very much looking forward to your...
and understandably so, because to me, that's the big question once you sort through everything we talked about today.
Yeah.
And one of the limitations of only being given so much time to speak,
For sure.
right?
Can't tackle it all.
Especially on an area like this.
That's why we have a Q&A now. That's why we have a
That's
Q&A.
exactly right. So, first of all, I would say today we were focused on God judging. God's judgment, God commanding or bringing judgment. So the remarks today were limited to that. However, some important things to understand is that God is the ultimate judge who in the end will establish complete justice.
Yep.
But God also delegates to authorities on earth that responsibility. Civil government has the responsibility for ensuring justice for its citizens, right? And therefore is given the power of the sword, Romans 13, which is basically say they can punish, they can enforce against the evildoer in crimes to bring justice back so that there can be peace. So it's a governmental responsibility. Parents have authority, which is the illustration I used today. And the important thing, and obviously judgment is not like, oh, capital punishment for you, kid. You just did.
Right.
It doesn't mean that, but it does mean bringing a corrective, a punishment, so that bad behavior stops, good behavior can begin, and so that peace can be established in your home, and also the person can be peaceful, your kid, as they move into adulthood. All judgment to not be vindictiveness, and I think I forgot to say this in at least one of the services, has to be motivated by love. Judgment without love is vindictiveness, and vindictiveness itself is an injustice perpetrated on people that takes peace away. So when the right authorities delegated by God bring judgment motivated by the fact they care about citizens and people, then it's healthy and good. Anything apart from that is just more injustice that cause damage.
Yeah.
Our role in justice is to, one, practice it in our own lives. I have control over me. That's pretty much it. But I'm going to do it in my own life. I can plead for it in my relational circles, so that when an injustice is committed, I can appeal for justice to be restored. And in the end, that means there's some kind of judgment. Even the person judging themselves, what I did is wrong, and I now want to make amends to balance the scales back again, so I can appeal for it. And then, as I think I mentioned toward the very end of the message, when it comes to groups of people in culture, in our world, that are particularly treated unjustly, the oppressed, those that are being trafficked, those that are being enslaved, those that are being abused, we need to plead their cause and fight for judgment to be rendered so that justice can be done and peace can be brought to those people. So in a short answer, that's how I would respond to that question. Does that make sense? Does that help at all?
It does. It's, love is like literally something we talk about, and we have talked about in every single one of our post shows during the discussion, or the deconstruction series. So it's not surprising, but also it's, as soon as you said that, I'm like, there's that word again.
There's that word again.
Like, it's the commonality between all of these tough topics, and probably other ones that we haven't talked about too. So,
and you don't bring judgment, as in corrective measures, if you don't care. Look around at every governmental structure. It doesn't even matter what kind of governmental structure you pick. If those leaders in that governmental structure don't care about people, injustice skyrockets. If you truly care, then you bring judgment against injustice in order to stop injustice, validate, vindicate, and restore those that have been harmed by it, and you can bring peace back into a culture. It all rises and falls on love.
I think that's a good point, though. I mean, I don't feel love in a lot of things like our government and other areas. And again, this is like a really easy perspective, and it's easy to break down and understand, but then it's also not, right? Like, why is something so simple not there? And I'm sure there's plenty of answers for that, but
that's so well said, Layla. we start by understanding the principle, the concept, the reality. And then once we've kind of got that, we begin to work it into the situations. And the situations are always complicated and nuanced and they have unique features. And it's hard to wrestle with how does that fit here? But again, we're taking the truth about God and trying to fit it in the situation, not taking the situation and using it to blame God. But it's work. It's hard work.
Yeah.
But it's the work followers of Jesus are supposed to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel like if people are just now tuning in, whenever this is done, if you're going to watch a part of this post show again, this is the part to watch again. Because I think it's very easy, especially, I mean, if you're cutting on the live stream, just like when you open up the Bible, if you read a verse, you can easily take that verse out of context. If you opened up the live stream and you hear just this point, I think it could be very easy for people to take this on as, oh, this church that's been doing this deconstruction series is promoting that I can go out and judge these people, not in a loving way, like you were just saying. I can go and judge these people because look at what that says. It says judgment restores justice. I believe this, and I believe that the world is not just in this way, so I'm going to go judge the people that do that.
Yep.
And that's not at all what we're promoting.
Not at all.
No.
Which is,
There's a huge, so well said, Josh. There's a huge difference between love-driven judgment within the authority God gave you in order to restore justice and peace and being judgmental, which is a totally different concept, which just means I'm basically going to condemn people who do things I don't like. Judgmentalism, utterly forbidden. Righteous judgment, God-honoring concept. Got to keep those separate.
absolutely. Absolutely. I'm glad we were able to tackle that because when I was creating the questions, I was looking at this and I'm like, you know, if I'm looking at this and going, if this is all that I'm listening to and I see this one point, you could, even myself could go, oh, I could see why just from those words, why people could take this out. So I was like, we got to talk about this today because it is that crucial
It's
And
good.
I
and
love
that
how
important.
you explained it because I never really heard like, oh, judgment with love. Like you don't hear about that.
No, not at
And
all.
I feel like it's so hard to like talk about this kind of thing because it's so easy to like be judgmental. Like it's so easy because we're so broken to be like, look how they're more broken than me.
Yeah.
Like that, it's just so easy to try to make yourself feel better. And so just like completely changing that mindset.
Yeah. Like love is the
That's
last
powerful.
thing I think
That's
of
good.
when I hear the word judgment or
Absolutely.
the act of judging. The last word when it should be the first.
Think of how differently you read and think. If when you hear the word judgment, the first thing you think of is a loving God restoring justice and peace in the world. As his image bearers, we're supposed to partner with him in the process. But because of our brokenness, like Elizabeth said, we actually exacerbate the injustice and we complicate things greatly. Elizabeth, thank you.
Thank you.
She's going to sing.
I'll join you shortly. I think I'm done.
You think
but,
you're done?
But I don't know.
I don't. I know that you were talking, and Elizabeth had to leave, and I was like, I don't know if Dave finished, but if you don't remember, that's totally fine. We can just go ahead and we can move on. So the last question, I think, will be pretty quick. I know that you touched on it just a little bit.
Elizabeth left her phone.
And you can take after this. We're going to Elizabeth.
We're
We're
gonna
taking
do
a
it.
whole bunch of
Let's just
selfies.
chip.
We're taking a whole bunch of selfies after this on your phone. How can we model to others a life of peace? What are some things that we can do to model a life of peace?
Well, all I can think about right now is the L word. Living in a loving,
Yes.
manner. Because I just sit here and think about, well, how do I judge, right?
Yeah.
Not always out of love, for sure. Because I just said a few moments ago, it's the last thing I think of. Because usually, if I'm judging, I'm angry or picking something apart, not with love. So that's the first thing that comes to mind for me is just really being centered in what love means to me and how that is displayed to others. I'll stop there. That's my first initial, love. Like it, there's so much to that word.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's, I can't help but think that's the root of it all.
Yeah.
Because if we're acting in a loving way, we're treating other people right. And if we treat them right, we're creating that foundation peace can even exist on. So often, people who think they're being peacemakers are actually just overlooking problems in the hopes that we can just get along. When true peacemakers are willing to address the problems in an effort to establish justice so that there can be real peace and not a fake peace, because we actually have issues going on that we just stuff down and then we try to get along with each other. That's really shallow. Peacemaking in the Bible is deep and difficult because it means tackling the issues, making righteous, loving judgments, working for justice so there can be real peace between people.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when I look at that, I go, treat people right.
Yep.
Be fair. Have integrity. Be honest. Be dependable. Be kind. If we can behave that way, we create an environment that peace can actually exist.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things I want to add to that, and kind of a nod to the women's conference, my wife went, I talked to her about the messages.
Yes.
One of the ways that I think that we as people can truly model peace is to show that we are okay with not being in control. And whenever somebody else is leading something or we're a part of something, that we're not constantly griping about it, that we're not sharing, oh, I would do this differently or I would do this differently, but just truly being okay with like, okay, I'm not in control of this situation and I'm just going to be here and I'm just going to enjoy whatever it is or I'm going to give it my all if it's at work or whatever, but truly showing that we are okay with not being in control, I think is a great way to model a life of peace.
That's good.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It certainly is.
yeah. Is there anything else to add to this one before we start wrapping up? Because you're about to have to go here in a minute.
I am.
So
Usually Layla has a mic drop moment.
Well-
So go ahead, lay it on us, Layla.
I mean, I have been noodling on just, and feel free to cut me off because I definitely don't want to make you late, but it's just like I can't help but think about all the things going on today, right? Especially overseas and,
absolutely.
you know, I don't know if there's anything to part with on what we can do, I think, to relate to this question, right? But with relevant topics too, right? Because there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
So I've kind of thought throughout the sermon today, and as we've been talking here in the post show, like, I don't know if there's something that we could kind of wrap up our conversation today with on how we can all, help with more relevant, not that things in the past aren't relevant, but I think there's things that we can learn from in the past and apply it to today, because there's a lot going on, and
That is
it's
so
hard to
true.
talk
Yeah.
through.
That is so true, Layla. And just you raising that issue made me have one of those duh moments. And it's like praying
Yeah.
for justice. Because so often, do you find yourself in a situation where, like, I don't know who's right, I don't know who's wrong, I don't know what degree one is right and what degree one is wrong, and I don't know. But God does. And say, God, just establish justice. Establish justice in Israel and the Middle East. Establish justice in Ukraine. Establish justice in our cities, in our culture, because God does know. God does make righteous, loving judgments. God can bring those correctives. God can move in people's hearts. So what a great perspective, Layla. And let's pray that the God who knows everything will establish justice so that peace can reign again.
I love that.
Yeah, it's good.
For sure. I think it's really good. Thank you for,
You're
as
welcome.
always, thank you for sharing,
My mic drop
Layla.
moment. I like that.
Well, I could imagine that people are probably listening to this one going, I got questions about this, because
Yeah.
as Layla just said, we can look at what it said in the Bible, but we can also look at our world today, and there's so many different things that we can question about, God's character with all of that's going on. So if you have any questions, you can go to our website, my3c.org. You can go to the top, submit a question, type it in on the box. It's totally anonymous. We'll have no idea who it is. If you want to let us know who you are, because you might want a more detailed response or you might have something you need to explain a little bit, you can put your name or your email in there, and Dave or myself will email you back and just be like, oh, hey, thanks for letting us know. Here's more of a little bit of a breakdown. But you do not have to do that by any means. Just a reminder, we are getting so many questions and we want to be able to focus on all of them specifically. So what we are doing is this upcoming Wednesday in our Q&A is going to be on deconstruction and any questions from our deconstruction series. But then after that, so not this upcoming Wednesday, but the Wednesday after that, we're going to start a new little series type thing with our Q&A where we're going to go, man, we got a lot of questions about this. We're going to do this next Q&A on these questions. And then the next week, we're going to go, oh, here's another one. We got a lot of questions on this. We're going to answer all these questions now. So if you have any questions about the Bible or anything, still submit them. But just know it might be a couple of weeks before we tackle them because we're going to start
Or a
breaking
couple
them
of
down.
months.
Or a couple of months where we start
It
tackling
could be
them.
a who knows.
Because we want to be able to gear them towards one whole discussion
Yeah.
where anybody that asks these questions about it might go, well, instead of having these questions about evolution every single week, we're just going to put them all together in one big Q&A. So it's the evolution Q&A or whatever those questions might be. So continue to submit those questions. We're still going to answer them. Like Dave said, it might be a couple weeks, might be a couple months. But I promise you, we are going to get to them at some point. I promise. So please, please, please keep submitting those questions. We can only do our Q&As because of you guys submitting your questions. Dave, one thing before we send you off that we're going to let everybody know of, there's a chance because, deconstruction's finishing this week. Like, this is the last deconstruction message.
Yeah,
this is the last
believe.
post show where we're probably going to be talking about this topic for a while. Now, it might come up in conversation. But next week, we're not going to see you in here. Because, one, Perry's speaking. So Perry might be in here doing the post show.
Oh, so this would be a great weekend to skip church.
Sure. Sure. But, Dave, I just want to tell you, thank you for coming in here.
Sure.
I know that I could only imagine that preaching 3 services and then coming in here doing the post show along with talking to everybody in the church can be quite tiring.
It's a long morning, but I love every minute of it. And I love this. I love the interaction we have. I love the perspective. This is worth every ounce of effort that goes into it.
Yeah. So I appreciate it so much. I know that everybody watching appreciates it so much. And we'll be excited for whenever you do join us again on another Sunday because out of this series, there's not a guarantee you'll be with us every single time. But you might pop in for a visit every once in a while for this post show.
I hope so, because I'll miss it.
So, but we really appreciate you.
Yeah,
I
my
guess
pleasure.
Perry needs to get prepared.
Yeah, Perry's.
I'm hearing.
We're just gonna ask Perry all the hard questions.
Can I sit in your seat when Perry's
Yeah,
here?
come on, you can do it
Yes.
next week. Maybe I won't be here. Maybe Dave will be the moderator next week.
I'm bringing popcorn.
Don't even. If I was in here for Dave and Perry, I'd just be like, I don't have to do
I got
anything this
nothing
week.
on.
I'll just sit here and just listen to them. So no, Dave. Seriously, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Everybody in the comments, let Dave know how much you appreciate him and thank him. He put in hours and hours and weeks and months creating this series. It's going to be on YouTube forever. So I'm so glad that you guys
Forever.
are going. I mean, hey, once it's online, it's online. So you guys will always be able to go back and watch these messages, watch these post shows. Thank you so much for tuning into them. I hope that you guys join us Wednesday night for our Q&A or listen to it after whenever we're finished filming it. But we will be back here next Sunday in person, 8:20, 9:40, and 11 o'clock. Then we'll be here for we have our pre-show at, let's see if we start at 9:40, at 9:25.
Good, man.
Layla's on that. It's a lot of fun. You should go watch it. They asked a question about a morning talk show and who they would do it with staff, and I actually had people say my name this time. Normally we do the staff questions, they don't say my name, which is fine because it's like who would you want to survive in the woods with? I wouldn't pick myself. If I'm picking me, I'm not picking myself. So, but no, we will be back for the post show after second service next week, and we hope that you guys tune in for that so we can get to talk to you guys and you guys get to listen to us again. But until then, have a fantastic week. We'll see you next Sunday.